So it's just amazing that this like cultural indigenous food is really helpful at preventing that postprandial glucose spike.
Hello and welcome to the Herbs with Rosalee podcast, a show exploring how herbs heal as medicine, as food, and through nature connection. I'm your host, Rosalee de la Forêt. I created this YouTube channel to share trusted herbal wisdom so that you can get the best results when relying on herbs for your health. I love offering up practical knowledge to help you dive deeper into the world of medicinal plants and seasonal living. Each episode of the Herbs with Rosalee podcast is shared on YouTube as well as your favorite podcast app. Transcripts and recipes for each episode can be found at herbswithrosaleepodcast.com or through the link in the video description. Also in the video description, you'll find other helpful resources. For example, to get my best herbal tips, as well as fun bonuses, be sure to sign up for my weekly herbal newsletter. Okay, grab your cup of tea and let's dive in. Mimi is a heart-centered herbalist who's been in service to the herbal community for a long time. It was an honor to sit down with her and hear about her traditions with nopales and tunas, or prickly pears and their fruit, and to hear about her journey of writing her fabulous new book. For those of you who don't already know her, Mimi Prunella Hernandez is an herbalist and author of the National Geographic Herbal. With her wealth of knowledge, unwavering dedication, and genuine love of all things herbal, she has devoted her life's work to advocating for traditional and professional herbal pathways. For over a decade, Mimi has served as the executive director of the American Herbalists Guild, where she has worked tirelessly to ensure that herbalists have a strong professional community to support their work. In 2023, Mimi received a Botanical Excellence Award from the American Botanical Council, a prestigious honor that recognizes her as a Mark Blumenthal herbal community builder. Well, Mimi, I'm so excited to have you on the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you. I am thrilled to be here. I'm just such a huge fan of yours. And when I got the invitation, I was like so happy.
Aw.
And I'm so happy to be sitting here now.
Well, I have to kind of admit something that maybe sound a little weird or awkward to you, but as I was, prepping for our time together and thinking about you, I was like, I think in my head, I know Mimi better than I actually do in real life because we've met before and, we like have social media going. And then, of course, I know you because you're the executive director of the HG and all this stuff. And then I was thinking about, I was like, but we haven't actually like hung out a whole bunch. But in my mind, like we have. Like, I think it's just been, like, that many years, like a decade of just kind of, like, going in the same circles and stuff, so I was kind of like, "Oh, yeah." So, within
I
that, like, I'm
know.
excited to hear your story and, like, your plant path and all of that because, like,
Right.
I don't really know it that well.
Right. It's true. Like I have sat down with you a couple times, but there was always other people around and I felt
Mhm.
shy. I don't know. I was thinking about the last time you were like, we were out to lunch or something with other people. And I don't know. I was kind of still in my shy years and yeah, so but I have this whole imaginary world about you too, about like your
That's funny.
cottage and your fields of flowers right outside your front porch and the woodland nymph stuff going on. I just have this whole like imaginary world about you.
I'll take it. I'll totally take it. That's funny that you say that too. I think if I think if we went out to lunch, I would feel shy just because like, you're Mimi Hernandez. Yeah.
Well, it'll be a power lunch. Let's just put it that way.
Okay. All right. I'll take
Okay.
that. So I would love to hear about your story and just all the weavings that's have led you here to us today.
All right. Well, I'm glad. It's hard to really pinpoint how I got here today, but I would say that my quest was multifold. I've always had a deep passion for science. And so I was very much like a science fair kid. And
Mm.
my first science fair project was like in second grade. And it was growing an avocado plant from a pit. And it's been like plant science ever since.
Nice.
So the science just like which draws me into all that stuff like anatomy and how the body works, coupled with botany and things like ecology and even like bird watching, ornithology that takes you outside. So I was like all over the sciences in a very academic way. But then there was also this like undercurrent of just like my family background and having like aunts and uncles and like grandmothers who were, herbs were just a normal part of life. And I never like really questioned it or um even took it seriously as a young person. I really was just like a fly on the wall that was like, "Oh, now she's doing that, now she's rubbing this herbal thing all over her. Oh, she woke up. She's fine." It's like just like witnessing all these like healings that my especially my grandmother in Mexico would participate in because a lot of like the neighborhood children and moms came to her, and so she was the one that she just always had like something in her cabinet that she was tinkering with, was always stirring something on the stove, and always just kind of talking to plants outside in the courtyard. And I think that I took on a lot of that, especially tinkering in the kitchen because
Hmm.
it's been a long path of like, am I this laboratory scientist person or am I this kitchen person? And I found out pretty quickly in my young adulthood that I'm definitely a kitchen person because I cannot measure things. I just like it's like some of this, some of that, and let's stir this in and taste it and more of that. And that quality was not really synergistic on the lab bench because having to measure things to like the micro, milliliter, it was just infuriating to me.
Mhm.
So yeah, the kitchen kind of took center stage in my life from a very young age. I've
Mhm.
always been trying new recipes and cooking and being creative in the kitchen. So I think at some point with all the sciences, I was really drawn to do something like medical school because that's what they say when you're a real scientific, smart person. They're like, you should be a doctor. And I was like, I always knew that I wanted to go into some kind of healing, and I had just a lot of question myself personally about like, what I really wanted out of that. Was that like an egoic kind of feather in my cap? Or if I really wanted to see, yeah, really wanted to, be learn about real world healing. And that wasn't medical school for 4, 5, 8 years, whatever they do. That's when I decided I really was gonna do the academic herbal path, and of course, back then, what did that mean? What's the academic herbal path? Now there's lots of programs. Back then, it was like, 30 some years ago, and I was like, I had that academic rug pulled out from under me because I thought, "Oh, I'll go to herbal medical school," and there really wasn't such a thing back then. And so at that point, that's when I was, didn't go to grad school at first and decided to go hang out with the Amish people in Indiana because that's where I lived. That's where I grew up.
Mhm.
And I learned a lot in a couple summers with Amish people of just really tending to bumps and bruises and cuts and things like that. And sleepy time stuff and growing things and just like really simple
Very
things. And
practical day-to-day stuff, yeah.
yeah, 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 but that was who I could find to teach me, because at that point my grandmother in Mexico had passed away. And yeah, so it was like that point in life where I'm like, all right, what am I doing? How am I going to learn this? And where, and wanting to be academic. But if you got a bachelor's and you want to do like a PhD or something, I ended up looking at all these like botanical medicine PhD tracks, and it was like, oh, you're going to study the pigment in the carrot for the rest of your life. It was like
Right,
so
yeah,
like
yeah.
honing in on just reductionist. I was
Mhm.
like, "I don't wanna study saw palmetto for the next 4 years. I wanna study, like, all the herbs," and so that's when, yeah, I did actually at that point, found an American Herbalist Guild symposium, and I went. I actually, at first I started doing, like, this herb what is it? The, Herb Society of America, and I was, like,
Right, yeah.
20 years old or 19, and so it was, like, me and all these little old ladies, and they were all, like, making lavender cookies and cinnamon cupcakes and stuff like that,
Mhm.
and there was one lady on there who's like, "Ooh, we should go to this herbalist medicinal herbalist conference," and she had this VW van, and I'm like, "Let's go," and we drove from Indiana to Georgia, and
Oh,
went
wow.
to an H conference, and that was, like, really, it's like, "Ooh, definitely people are doing this," and I kind of found that there's a lot of people into it, so
I just, like I love that thought of, like, young Mimi going to her first American Herbalist Guild symposium, and now, you're 11 years, you've been the executive director of the HG,
I
like
would I would never have dreamed that. I mean, that was I I still talk to that lady too. I'm like, "Can you believe I'm now in charge of that organization?" That,
Hmm.
I got there. I remember, like, kinda being really overwhelmed because I'm like, "Oh, this is exactly everything I was looking for." And then, like, I went outside. It was very overwhelming. I'm a very emotional person. I went outside and sat on a rock and just cried. I'm like,
Oh.
"Oh, yes." Um, yeah, because, ironically, because I did have the academic degree, so I was working at a company called Dow AgroScience, and it was like this is like some hardcore plant research stuff.
Mhm.
And I was doing this, working on this research project where they were studying the DNA of tobacco plant, and that was a cool project, and then it ended, and then they reassigned me to this greenhouse laboratory that was working with Roundup, and, like, literally, we were testing, like, these chemicals on weeds, and that's when my heart was like, "I cannot do this. I cannot."
Wow.
So I got that whole, like, plant consciousness type of like, this wall came up in me, and I was
Mm.
just like, "What?"
Yeah. Wow, that's so interesting. I did not know that as part of your background, so yeah, that's
Yes,
fascinating.
I'm not. I saw yeah, no, I saw a lot of interesting things of, working in my lab science days, and I did, also did some work at University of Wisconsin in their nutrition lab and so it's like, I still love science, and it just I wanted it directed into, like, a different way and in a kind of more overall way where I could learn about a lot of plants.
Mhm. Oh, I'm really excited to talk about your book, because that seems like a great segue, but I'm gonna hold off and just follow the formula of the podcast, and, let's talk about prickly pear. I'm really excited that you
Ooh.
chose prickly pear as your herb
Mhm.
because it is such a fascinating plant, yeah, with so many gifts, so I'd love to hear from you about prickly pear.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I chose prickly pear cactus. It's definitely, I mean, first of all, in the kitchen, it's so versatile. It's a food that I grew up with my Latin American roots. It's actually, we call it nopales or nopalitos, and we have it for almost every meal. It's kind of our garnish to everything. And and the fruit is really delicious. It takes a lot of effort to get into it because of all the little spines and all the prickles, and so it's kind of a labor of love, but once you're into it and got either the juice or the pulp, then there's, like, so many, fun recipes, just a
Mhm,
really beautiful flavor, especially I live in North Carolina in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains, and it's just phenomenal to me that it grows native here in this area. I've got a big stand of it here at the Ponderland, and it's just like I have a love affair with it. And I'm still, it's still a very respectful thing because I can't just go grab it. But my son does go up and grab it, like he doesn't care, but I won't do that because it hurts. But,
Yeah, this is not like a stinging nettle hurt too. This is like you
yeah,
get those blockheads in you and they're like they keep coming
it's
back. Well, they stay there. They
sneaky.
just stay embedded. Yeah.
They're sneaky and almost microscopic. But yeah, no, I love, first of all, I love the flavor. I love, making the salsa with it and everything. As a herbal medicine, I'm, like, very intrigued, in the Mexican diet, there's a lot of, I guess, propensity for diabetes type 2, and not only in Mexico, but in a lot of Latin American countries and in the Southwest, and so it's just amazing that this, like, cultural indigenous food is, really helpful at preventing that postprandial glucose spike,
Mhm.
according to some research. And some of the research is really fun because they really are eating a lot of Mexican food, like chilaquiles and enchiladas and chiles rellenos. And then they're like, so like give you big, authentic Mexican food, and then they give you cactus. And so, it's a really just beautiful, even just as a beverage, like, I like making the green cactus smoothie. I like juicing it. It's just so refreshing, but I really love the fruit. I'm, like, so in
Mhm.
love with
Mhm.
the fruit.
I was recently in Austin. And, there's not like prickly pear things where I live here up north. I'm almost, by Canada. And down in Austin, it was like I went into like health food stores or even just restaurants, and there was like so many, like if it had prickly pear, some kind of prickly pear beverage, I just got it every single time
Mm,
because
yeah.
I was so excited, just like the ubiquitousness of it.
Yeah, and then, since I've had a patch here, it's just been really cool to tend to it and then, like, see
Mm,
all the seasons around it because the flowers are gorgeous. I mean, they're just
yeah.
so beautiful, and it's just like nothing else that grows around here. It's just so precious to my heart, and just such a beautiful food and medicine.
I don't know if you would know this, Mimi, but as you're talking about just how popular it is in Mexico, and as we know, all over where it grows, are there like prickly pear cactus farms? Are people cultivating it? And especially because when you buy it in the store, it comes often processed, like they remove the spines and the
Mhm,
glochids. And so I just
mm,
imagine like obviously there has to be some kind of production around it, but I've never thought
mhm.
of like prickly pear cactus farms before.
There's a couple that I know of even, like, in my region that,
Hmm,
I don't know them by name, but I've seen a couple of, just have noticed,
interesting.
I don't remember even where, but I would look it up. But, yeah, no, I'm aware of a couple of places that were, like, just starting some cultivation, so I wouldn't say, like, big farms, but
Mhm.
I mean, it grows where it grows wild, it grows pretty abundantly, and out here
Mhm.
in North Carolina, even, like, toward the coast, it's, like, all over the place. But, yeah, no, I definitely could see the fruitfulness of growing it, and cultivating it because, there's beautiful products that can be made from it, value added products and jams. Like I love the prickly pear jam that I've got right now. I made a bunch because I just got married and so we did a lot of homestead foods. And
Mm.
prickly pear was real center in a lot of my recipes for the wedding. So I've got a couple
Oh,
jars of jam
lovely.
in there. It's so good.
I
It's just
am definitely of the philosophy that pink makes everything better, like and so I feel that way with prickly pear and jamaica or hibiscus, that,
Mhm,
those are I
mhm,
love making medicine with them because
mhm.
the color is so amazing.
It's so brilliant, and then it's, like, really trendy too, and, like, these really expensive bars where you can have the martinis and things like that, but it makes such a beautiful cocktail too and mocktail.
Mhm,
So,
mhm.
yeah, I just love that.
So far you've talked about prickly pear as a food and as medicine, especially for postprandial glucose spikes, and seems like we should maybe mention that it's kind of demulcent. I think of that, when I
It's
think of
very
prickly pear.
slimy. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, so there's, of course, the outside, which is a little daunting, and I use my gloves and tongs to pick the pads, the young pads, ideally, we want the pads that are like the spring growth because those are the tenderest, the most tender and the most flavorful. And so I would pick those young pads, and or the fruits, which the fruits are just stopped fruiting. So we're thinking like late October for fruits, and maybe like June for the spring pads. Uh,
Okay.
um, and yeah, so after you cut into them, it's very slimy. The pads are very just kind of like aloe, just thick and mucilaginous on the inside. So it's interesting because if you get the prickles on you, then you just use the poultice of the inside of the pad to as a drawing poultice to pull it out,
It's very
because of
kind.
that slime. Mhm, mhm,
And I thought it was interesting in your descriptions that, when I've prepared it, prickly pear, like from the earth, so I'm the one that's doing all the prep. I've done the burn method, like use tongs, put it over open flame and, let the things burn
mhm,
off. And you
mhm,
also mentioned like rubbing it off with sand, rubber
mhm.
gloves and sand, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, that's how I do it because
Yeah.
I like to just kind of sit on the porch and I've got my big sink. It's like a big like bucket of sand, and I've got my gloves. I'm just kind of sitting there and chit-chatting with whoever's here, because usually there's someone here because it's a big job to bring in the cactus,
Mm,
the tuna, we call them tuna.
tuna.
And but it's just, yeah, I just sit there and I'm scrubbing and toss it in the other bucket and then scrub and toss.
Mm,
But, for me, like, fire is not like, I feel like it wouldn't be as efficient with me.
mm,
I'm not saying that I'm not into fire. It would just be a whole different thing. Like, then I gotta
mhm.
make a fire. Well, I know some people use the little torch, like, I don't know, I'm not a torch
Like a
person.
blowtorch. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm a very water, sand oriented.
Love it.
I could see other people being drawn to fire, the
Mhm,
fire method. But yeah, the fire methods, also I've heard is really effective. But
mm.
the sand method was like I've never had to try anything else because it just works so.
Yeah, I'm very curious now. I want to try that.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm,
Well, the recipe that you shared with us is absolutely gorgeous. It has that hot pink color that I know and love, and I love how versatile it is too. And I haven't tried it yet, but I plan on it, and I love the additional herbs that you put in there too. So will you
mhm.
share a little bit about that recipe?
Sure. Yeah, actually, and that came about because usually when I'm doing the prickly pear tuna, the fruit, I am going for the pulp. I'm either scooping pulp out or I'm juicing it, because it juices pretty well. But then you're left with this huge, like, sludge of seeds that have a lot of substance all around them. The seeds are like pebbles. So the way it started is I just put all that. I'm like, what am I going to do with this? And I put it on a jar of vinegar, regular vinegar. And I was just amazed at the color, but also at the texture because the vinegar became very like viscous.
Mm,
And so it just had this very soft, velvety feeling on the tongue. And it was just such a beautiful flavor. And so now every year I also do the infused vinegar, but I have, the time of the year um, is also the time of the year that I harvest lemon verbena. And
mm,
lemon verbena is a South American plant that I have a lot of kinship with, and it grows in my herbal spiral garden.
mm,
And I just felt like the flavors, I mean, they're both like Latin American fusion flavors, but you got this like tropical and this very kind of aromatic citrus. And it's just they just meld so well together.
mm,
And so I decided to combine them, and it's just such a great it's just so delicious. Now it's, like, aromatic and beautiful fuchsia pink, and then it has texture, and then it's just beautiful, and I like vinegar a lot, so I probably have vinegar every day somehow, either on salad
mhm,
or greens or a spoonful, and so but it also because it's in, like, it's October, right, when I'm doing this every year, it's kinda perfect timing for holiday packages and festivities,
mm.
and you show up to potlucks, and I've got the big bottle of this fuchsia vinegar, and it's just
Oh, I
so
love it.
Mhm. Yeah, it's really
Yeah,
good.
I love vinegar so much. It's one of my most I just strained off, almost 3 gallons of hawthorn vinegar, and we go through it, in a
Mm.
year.
Oof.
I just love it too for all of the things you mentioned, and as a drinking vinegar too, so,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing that recipe
Mhm.
with us. Is there anything else that you'd like to share about prickly pear?
Oh, I mean, just, yeah, I can't wait to just for people to try it. Definitely if anyone tries it, I'd love to hear your impressions of it. I have a whole, on my just called Prickly Pear Cactus Adventures. It's just an album on my Facebook page, but it's like because I have it's just messy too, right? So there's that. You mentioned that's very mucilagynous, and so if you're whenever you open one, put it in the juicer. I mean, the whole juicer is like overflowing with slime, so you
Mm.
can't you can't avoid it. Very messy. It's definitely something on you do on the porch. I also make a colonche, which is a traditional
Oh,
Mexican recipe that's fermented prickly pear fruit juice. So it
wow.
just kind of tastes like wine. It's really
No,
delicious.
that sounds lovely.
Wine with legs because it's still got that viscosity.
Hmm.
Mm,
Well, thank you so much for sharing about prickly pear and just your traditions around this plant. I love that this really is just something that is a part of your life and something
mhm,
that you work with all the time and just have these seasonal traditions with.
mhm,
It's lovely. Well, I'm really excited to talk about your book, Mimi.
mm,
Um, I don't know what I was really expecting with this book. This is the National Geographic Herbal
mhm,
and just published recently. And I don't really know what I was expecting because I knew it was you. So
mhm,
there's,
uh-huh.
that expectation, but it's also like, oh, National Geographic, like what kind of book is that going to be? I've seen their magazines about herbs and stuff, and I am just blown away by this book. Really because of you, right?
Aw.
um I love first of all there's 100 herbs in
Mhm.
this hardback edition. It's beautiful, but the writing is just so great. Like when did you learn to write like this?
That's a good question. I mean, I just because I'm never really considered myself much of a writer aside from okay, scientific writing back in the day, but that's all citation after citation after okay, and then I had, like, at some point I've done a lot of music. I've written a lot of music lyrics and things like that. I've got a lot of music community locally,
Oh,
and
interesting.
so I think that kind of brought out a more, like, poetic, meaningful way to communicate.
Hmm.
In terms of, like, writing about herbalism, I haven't done a lot. I was always a lecturer. I was always a verbal teacher, which is something that, even, like, in Latin American herbalists are more like, "We're talking about it. We're just gonna keep talking about it. We're gonna bring you to our kitchen and keep talking about it." So, when I had to, like, sit down and write about it, it was definitely a lot of, like, setting ritual for myself to, um to let the words come, and
Mm.
so I would sit and just kind of write everything I knew about a plant, just free form, and then kind of think about why I love the plant,
Mm. That
because
really comes through.
yeah,
Yes.
it's always like I want because it's National Geographic, so there's an assumption that this is going out to general public, and a lot of people that don't have this love affair with plants like we do. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna open people's eyes, and there was a lot about bringing in the senses, um,
Mm.
and also not just the senses, but also bringing in the herbalist experience because I feel like with a lot of reference books like this that they forget to mention that herbalists are out there or that herbalists use these and herbalists know these. They just kind of talk about plants without talking about herbalists. And so that was really important for me to make sure that I was talking about how an herbalist would use this plant or how a wild crafter would work with this plant, or how a clinical herbalist or a kitchen herbalist or a woodland herbalist, and just like different ways of relating to plants. And of course, I'd mention researchers and doctors here and there, but for the most part, I really wanted, people who pick this up to know that it's from the lens of an herbalist from different in many different contexts. So
Mm.
that was really important ethos to me. So yeah,
It
that's
really comes through, and I
Mhm,
think that is what sets this book apart from other kind of, like, compendiums, like you said, that don't take in that herbalist perspective, because you have 100 plants, and each plant, as far as I can tell, I've read a lot of it, but not all of it, but pretty much all the books, it's like, what, 2 pages, right?
yeah,
These front-facing pages,
mhm,
and that could easily be filled with facts that could be, like, one ear and out the other, and I think a lot of books like this are, right? They're just these, like, quick, like, facts, like, these are the uses of this herb, and they're just almost, like, list based or something, I
mhm,
don't know, there's just no magic to them. But your book, doesn't do that. Like, your book, just the writing of it is very inviting, and you share so much information in a short span of time, but it's so readable. Like, it's not, over the top heady, and like you said, you often talk about herbalist experience from all over the world too, and the
mhm,
sidebars, um
mhm.
have been so fascinating to me. Like, I've learned so much about plants, like the flax, drink of Peru.
The
I didn't know
Amazonian
about that.
plant.
I didn't know about the spilanthes leaves being used in a
Oh,
soup.
soup in Brazil.
So there's just, like, so much, Dr. Tiarana Lodog wrote your introduction, as you know, and in it, she says that from the herbal curious to the experienced herbalist will love this book, and I 100% agree with that. I think somebody could pick up this book just being like, "Oh, you know, what are plants good for?" And they
Mhm,
would get so much out of it, and I'd like to think of myself as somewhat of an experienced herbalist, and I love it. I
uh-huh,
love it. I absolutely love it, and 2, it's, there's all these herbs in there. And then there's like these kind of like little breaks in it where you have like herbs for the skin, or you
uh-huh,
talk about energetic herbalism, or you talk about
mhm,
different herbal preparations. So there's a lot in there. It's not just a list, which would be plenty because again, there's so much
mhm,
fabulous information in here about the plants themselves, but just also about herbalism and
mhm,
herbalists.
mhm.
Yeah, this is truly like an herbalist's herbal, this book.
Yes, yes, and I just, also wanted to point to different traditions and, remind people that this wisdom is seeded from different parts of the world, from different habitats, from different traditional people, indigenous people, just all over the world. And so I wanted to make sure there was that kind of cultural context with the way we're looking at things. And so, yeah, that
That
was,
very much comes through too,
yeah.
like the cow chapter, the spilanthes again.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, just so many things. I couldn't praise this book enough. And woodland herbalism. And
Oh,
this is like one of those books that I will keep it on the coffee table, but not as like just something that looks pretty, but something like I want to have readily at hand because it's so readable. Like, it's not
mhm.
just a lookable, it's a readable.
Yeah.
And yeah. Yeah, I love it so much. Well done. I can't
Well,
imagine
thank
like
you.
100 herbs. That's a lot of work, I know, to put out a book like that. And yeah, it's just absolutely phenomenal.
It means so much, especially coming from you because your books are so beautiful.
Oh, thanks. Well, Mimi, I would love to hear about the question I'm asking a lot of people in season 10 is about their herbal teachers apart from the plants. And I already told you that I have a specific request in mind because I know you have a lot of herbal teachers, your
Mhm,
abuela, and many people along the way. But I would love to hear about James Duke because
mhm,
that is someone who I was never able to meet, and someone who is just such a beloved person who's done, so much for the herbal world. And so I'd love to hear from you, just a little homage to
uh-huh.
Jim Duke.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. He definitely was the person that changed my life and put me on the right
Mm.
path, in terms of, so I told y'all we went to this AHG conference. Well, before that, I was a big Jim Duke groupie, like in terms of
Hmm.
like reading all his books and his articles. And there was just something in the way that he described plants that was just so kind of upbeat and uplifting. And, and I have to say, I also, this is real curious because my family's Colombian, and I understand that, he's like a Southern white gentleman, but he, in some ways, opened my eyes to ethnobotany of Colombia because he was doing studies in the Amazon, and working with indigenous folks in the Amazon, for the USDA, and to do, study some of the cultural plants there. And so that was such a passion of mine because I still have family in Colombia, but they're not like taking me to the Amazon to like look at the plants. They're more like in Bogota in the city, So
Hmm.
so it's like interesting. So then, with that context, he also has written books, and his books have been translated to Spanish. And he even wrote like a book about like Spanish lexicon of like, kind of some interesting and curious words in Spanish. And I don't know. So then it ended up being like a family thing where my mom and my aunts and, we were all like reading his Spanish books and stuff. And so, but when I was at the AHG conference, I met a couple of people there who were going to this grad school in Maryland, and that was Thai Sophia at the time. And Kevin Spellman was one of these people, another teacher of mine, and he's like, yeah, so James Duke is going to be one of the faculty persons there. They're starting a whole botanical program and herbalism, and I didn't even need to hear more. I had a little baby and I was like, we're leaving, we're moving. I'm quitting that agroscience job and we're going to pack it up,
Wow.
move to Maryland. And I was probably there like 3 months later at like the foot of Dr. Duke, just like listening to him sing songs about plants. He had like a little ditty about like every plant,
Hmm.
and then I just kinda became his shadow. I was, like, working in his gardens, the green pharmacy gardens a lot, learning, like, with my hands in the dirt and, helping him, and he always had, like, a soup. Every time we had a crew at the gardens, he just had, like, kind of this outdoor area where he would make a big old pot of vegetable soup with fresh herbs, and so he was, like, and that to me was something that really spoke to my heart a lot because it's that kitchen herbalist, thing that calls to me, which is like how I first got into herbs. And then my teacher, who's probably one of the most scientific people I've known, because he will talk jargon. I mean, he will talk very scientifically, you know. He's a very brilliant scientist, but he also had this like kitchen effect and feeding people and exploring these flavors around the garden and
And
so
singing songs too.
and singing songs, yeah, and we've
Yeah.
sung, I was like, I've got to sing songs with him on stage. It's probably some of the most beautiful moments of my
Mhm.
life.
Wow.
Just singing about Appalachian plants and singing about ginseng and just these fun songs, and I've got his trunk because they gave me a bunch of his, like, tapes and, I've got, like, a bunch of his, like, old books, and I'm like, "What am I gonna do with all these?" Because he made a recording called the Herb Album or Herbal Bum. It's, like, depends on how you say it, but,
Hmm.
he had a CD that came out, and it's all his, like, his songs that he used to play the fiddle and just sing these songs, directly to the USDA and the research and the people in power about, the importance of plants and simple remedies. Because
Mhm.
so, yeah, he's, like, just such a loving gentleman, and his wife, Peggy, beautiful union because she was the illustrator of all his books. So she also is a very special connection for me, and,
Mhm.
yeah, I miss them dearly.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for sharing a bit about them both. And yeah, just what a character he was, and I just love that he really held that space of communicating to the USDA and being able to go in with the scientific jargon while also being so deeply rooted with the plants
Mhm.
themselves in the
Mhm.
garden and feeding and music. And yeah, it's beautiful.
And he knew that I was gonna write a book. It was several years after he passed away that I did, but he used to always tell me, he's like, "I'm gonna write your foreword." And
Mm,
that was like, so in a lot of ways, like when this book came out, like I wrote about him in the intro to kind of
mhm,
still weave him into the story. I can't think of anyone, Dr. Low Dog is such a blessing, that she stepped in and did the forward and did such a beautiful work with that. But um yeah, it took me a long time to be able to like sit and write. Uh, and um and so, yeah, but I kept hearing, like, his voice of reassurance during that whole
mm.
process.
Oh, how beautiful, Mimi.
Thank you.
Well, Mimi, I'm walking away from this thinking you are a manifester of your dreams. You went from being like, herbs are it, to going to an herbal symposium, to becoming the executive director of the American Herbalist Guild, and just all your stories of like, I knew this was my path, and then I found Thai Sophia, and 3 months there, I was there with my babe in arms. I
Mhm,
mean, you really are a go-getter and just a manifester of your dreams, and
mhm.
I'm so glad that you said yes to this dream of the book with National Geographic, because it's just like it's an herbalist's herbal, and yeah, your passion and love for plants and all of that you brought, the traditional plants, and there's science in there. There's the herbalist perspective. I mean, just has everything. It really feels like, I think that's what it was. Like reading the book, I feel seen. Like, oh yeah, like this is my life here in
So
this book.
awesome. Oh my gosh, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all of your gifts, for all that you've done with the HG for the past decade, for the book, and yeah, just all of it, Mimi. I'm very impressed with you and grateful for your work.
Well, thank you. Well, we'll have that power lunch someday soon.
That sounds wonderful.
Okay.
Thanks, Mimi.
Alright. Thanks, Rosalie.
Thanks for being here. Don't forget to head over to the show notes at herbswithrosaliepodcast.com to download your beautifully illustrated recipe card and to get a transcript of this show. There, you'll also be able to sign up for my weekly newsletter, which is the best way to stay in touch with me. The best way to check out Mimi's offerings is on Instagram at Mimi Prunella Hernandez. I also highly recommend her book, The National Geographic Herbal 100 Herbs from the World's Healing Traditions. You can find that wherever books are sold. If you'd like more herbal episodes to come your way, then one of the best ways to support this podcast is by subscribing on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. I'd also love to hear your comments about this episode. What's your biggest takeaways? I deeply believe that this world needs more herbalists and plant-centered folks, and I'm so glad that you're here as part of this herbal community. Also, a big round of thanks to the people all over the world who make this podcast happen week to week. Nicole Paul is the project manager who oversees the whole operation, from guest outreach to writing show notes to actually uploading each episode, and so many other things I don't even know. She really holds this whole thing together. Francesca is our fabulous video and audio editor. She not only makes listening more pleasant, she also adds beauty to the YouTube videos with plant images and video overlays. Tatiana Rusikova is the botanical illustrator who creates gorgeous plant and recipe illustrations for us. I love them. I know that you do too. Christy edits the recipe cards, and then Jenny creates them as well as the thumbnail images for YouTube. Michelle is the tech wizard behind the scenes, and Karen is our student services coordinator and customer support. For those of you who like to read along, Jennifer is who creates the transcripts each week. Xavier, my handsome French husband, is the cameraman and website IT guy. It takes an herbal village to make it all happen, including you. Okay, you've lasted to the very end of the show, which means you get a gold star and this herbal tidbit. Well, a couple of months ago, I had the pleasure of being down in Austin, Texas at the American Botanical Council Gardens with Gail Engels and Jesus Garcia. And as we were walking around, in one corner of the gardens was this large patch of a prickly pear cactus. And as we walked by, I noticed that there was a lot of white clumps on the pads, and so I asked what that was. And Gail reached out and she plucked some up and she crushed it between her fingers, which instantly turned this like bright red pink color. And I knew what it was: cochineal. This is a scale insect that grows on Opuntia plants or prickly pear plants, and it makes this substance that's commonly made into a red or pink dye. I have a beautiful pink scarf that my friend Emily, who I met in college, made for me when she was in Africa, that she made with cochineal. It was really fun to finally see that relationship with the insect and the plant in person.